Matthias, hi, Eric.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
Hey.
Yep.
How's everyone doing?
It's unseasonably warm in Sweden, so I'm a bit miserable, but I'll be fine.
Also here in Austria, I mean, I'm not complaining about the warmth. I don't winter that much, which maybe would not make me an ideal city for Sweden, but I like it to be warm and not rainy, but it's starting to get humid because we have rain.
How are you, Andrea?
I'm okay, thanks. They say there is a heat wave coming here as well. So today it's 22 degrees, which is one of the top temperature this summer, I guess. So maybe the heat wave is coming.
Where are you based, Andrea?
Wales.
Wales. Okay, that's more for Wales. Okay.
Yeah.
It would not be warm for Italy. That's what I meant.
But you said 22 degrees, right? Celsius.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've had 32 here in Sweden. And I guess we're getting something like that soon, also this week.
Yeah, Wales for some reason is always quite mild and rainy, whether it's summer or winter. It never goes too much down or too much up the temperature.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
All right. So I started sharing the agenda. I hope you guys can see it. So I only had two things. One is what you mentioned on chat.
By the way, is there another, which HackMD file are you using? Because that's not the one in the meeting invite, right?
Oh, am I using the wrong one?
No, I think you might be using the right one, but the meeting invite has the vocabulary one.
Actually, there are multiple in the invite, so the top one should be the one. At least for me, it opens the right document if I click the top link in the meeting invite.
Yeah, it seems to be the...
It sometimes does not properly update for me. That might be the reason.
I also put the link in the chat.
Thanks.
All right. So, okay, to get started. Right, so two things that I wanted to discuss. One is what you mentioned, Alois, about the long-term home for the spec, and I guess the SDK as well. And the other thing, I wanted to make a quick presentation of the POC where we stand now. And yeah, I don't know. Does anyone else have anything they want to discuss today? We can add it to the agenda.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, shall we get started then with the point you asked?
Yeah. So yeah, I think for the spec and everything, I was wondering whether we put this into its a dedicated project, because right now it's living with the working group, but as it evolves as a spec and other things, I think you should have. So I think it becomes a project, and I usually like to compare it to OpenTelemetry to some extent, not that it's like one-to-one there, but we have a specification where we will have versions, we will have obviously the libraries as mentioned. And I think we also want to establish open source project-like structures of people who are contributors, maintainers, and therefore, that's why my idea was to move this into a dedicated project where I just came up with a name. It could be some name that could be something like open lifecycle orchestration or whatever we want to call it, and then have a dedicated governance and all of those structures for a project in place, especially as more projects that are going to build on top of it. I think that structure would be ideal from my point of view. I just wanted to get your feedback on this, because for the SIG, obviously you have the SIG chairs, but you have no other maintainers on like the project, and this also they might be contributing to it. I know that usually it's not part of a SIG or of a SIG charter to create new open source projects. At least that's the case in the CDF, and I assume the CDF is kind of similar there, but I think for this case, it would make sense. And there were other cases like the GitOps working group, like created their own projects where they keep stuff as well as they go there. So this was just my proposal, and I just wanted to hear your feedback, whether you think this is a very bad idea, this is something to discuss, or it's a good idea, more or less just your to get this discussion started.
Yeah, from my point of view, I think that is definitely the plan, long term or mid-term. It depends how fast we go. We started in the CDF SIG events working group repo just because we had the repo and it's a easy and quick way to get started, and we wanted to focus first on getting the initial draft and POC up and running. Which might also be a mean to attract more contributors and make the point of why we are doing what we're doing. But yeah, and I mean definitely I think we should have a dedicated home for this. I think there are a few bits like you mentioned, the spec. So the spec might go into its own repo with its own versions and tags and everything. We started working on SDK as well. We might eventually have an ecosystem of adapters. Or, I don't know. This is something that we'll need to discuss if we want to host adapters in the same place, or if we want to leave somewhere else.
I wouldn't host them there, but I think that adapters, like for new editions and so forth, I think they want to have also the process established of how things make it in, like how is this usually enhanced. I mean, I don't want to create anything too complex, don't get me wrong, but like how are like the individual adopters, like how can they influence the spec and so forth? Like most projects have some kind of enhancement proposal project, and therefore I think it might feel a bit like an overkill, but like also speaking like from a captain, I think it's also the same from the Tecton point of view. If this is the central means of communication in another project, I think you want to have some kind of like process behind it, how you can actively contribute to it. I think that's also maybe attracting especially more commercial solutions as well. Say, well, this is like not just an open spec. This is a project. It's behaving like a project. You can contribute. You can join it. You can take an active role in there. There is a well-defined governance.
Yeah, I didn't think about the governance until now, but yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we might set up a governance separated from this group. I don't think it's like it wouldn't be the top priority for me to do it right now, but yeah, I'm open to mainly because I think we have limited capacity, and I just wanted to focus first on getting things started and having something to talk about. But I think definitely that's also why I started this discussion about the naming, because I think when we have the name, we can start buying a domain and have a website. I was using Cloud Events as a reference, as a model, if you will, and I think they have a similar process. So they were born out of the serverless working group, but they are an independent project with their own governance and spec and projects and everything. So it would be a similar model, I think.
There could be some inspiration to get from the Eiffel project, because Matthias will know more, but they basically started like a community around the spec itself, where many companies and stakeholders are now contributing various parts. I'm working on a .NET library for Eiffel right now, so there might be some inspiration to get there.
Yeah, in Eiffel we have we have a name Eiffel, so it's the Eiffel community, which is the base, and then we have the protocol itself, and then we have all the various tools around it, like SDKs and so on. But there we have kind of like the SIG is one repo in the Eiffel community called Eiffel community. Let me see, just so I don't mess up myself right now. We call it the community repo. So we have a different we twist it a little bit than we do here, because here we got the SIG events, which holds kind of like these meetings and so on, and that's what we host in the community repo in the Eiffel community space. So that's a little bit different. So I guess this will look more like what we have in Cloud Events, where I looked at their GitHub structure, and they have Cloud Events, and then they have a spec, and then they have all the SDKs under the what you call the top organization, probably they call it. So the Cloud Events is one organization, whereas Eiffel is called Eiffel Community is the organization. But then the question what I have is, if we would break out the protocol into its own repository, which I don't think is a bad idea, is there anything else in this group that we have that we would do that would not be part of the protocol that we're creating?
That's a good question. I think one of the mission of the SIG would always be to, from my point of view, to get people involved, maybe doing presentations about how they use events in CI/CD and different parts of CI/CD, and having presentation, having user stories, doing this kind of work, having discussion about specific areas of the protocol might also still be part of the SIG. That would be my take. And then developing the SDKs and developing, you know, I think mostly developing the SDK, maintaining the spec might be done in a separate project, but I would expect at least in the beginning, there would be a lot of overlap between the team that is part of the SIG and the team that is doing maintaining the open source project. But over time, they might diverge. They would probably diverge.
Okay, so you see that SIG, it might actually have more general, like more like talks and discussions, presentation around events in general, which might not be part of the new repo. Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable. I has felt that the creating of the new protocol is probably the kind of like the biggest thing that this SIG is going to be doing. So therefore, it's probably going to be mostly that we're doing.
I think it might also be fair that this is now focusing on establishing the project, keeping it up and running, and as the project grows, I think it can run like a lot of the activities. But again, like outreach, education can either be part of the project or the SIG, and I think also new things will make it into the topics there as well.
Yeah.
And I think also if we then decide why we do all the work over there, and we have an established project that's used by hundreds of tools out there, that's a great achievement then by itself as well. That's really well. Okay, if this is what was bootstrapped here, then it would I'd say it would be fine as well. But it feels like it all centers around, if we want to establish this as a project, we actually need a name, because otherwise it will be hard to buy a domain or even name the project right now.
Yes, we definitely need a name. So we had an initial discussion about the name in some meeting ago. And yeah, so we had a few things that I think we agreed upon, like we don't want the name to be associated to the SIG or to the CDF specifically. And I think this makes sense also in light of the discussion that we're having today. But we had several different opinions, maybe about different ideas about whether the name should be descriptive or should be more like, I don't know, a nice name that is not necessarily associated with the specifics of the project. So we had several different ideas, and I think we need to continue with the discussion there. And yeah, just agree on a name that I think we can stick to on the long term, because I would hate to go and create a GitHub org and projects and docs and then having to rename everything. I mean, the work in progress name that we're using in the SDK is simply CDE Cloud CDE events, continuous delivery events, but that's not necessarily the name we want to stick with.
I'd also say for the name to have something that actually reflects what it's doing in detail. I mean, events in the context of CD makes sense, but if you take the delivery foundation piece out of it, what stays is events from the current name. So events for what? Like it needs to contain the domain the events are for.
Yes. One of the concerns with having a name that describes the kind of the context where the protocol acts is that if we kind of change the scope in the future, then you're stuck with a name that might not describe anymore what the protocol is about. That's why one of the proposals was maybe to take a name which is, I don't know, some Greek word or some name that we like, but it is not necessarily fully descriptive. But that's one of the proposals. So I'm not sure. I don't think we can come to a conclusion on the name discussion here in this group right now. So yeah.
I think we should just collect maybe or set some time frame where people can make proposals for names, and then we can.
Yeah, I sent around a form, and I think it's still open. So if you want to see what the proposals were, and if you want to add your own proposal or comments, let me put it in the chat.
I think we said some kind of deadline or attempt is 1st of October to have something ready by then, I think.
Yes. Good point, thanks. Okay. So I think we have. Oh, we have a 1 hour schedule, so we have time. Okay. All right. Anything else on this topic that we can discuss today? Any other opinions?
Not from me.
Okay. All right. Then I would switch to the second part, which I wanted to show you where we stand with the POC and what is working today. And so let's see. Okay. I hope this is readable, but I painted this diagram basically to show what's deployed in the cluster where the demo is running today. Actually, maybe first step. So I wrote this POC.sh. This is a script with a bunch of dependencies and prerequisites. But basically, if you have everything that is needed installed, it will create a kind cluster and install a bunch of stuff. So it will install Tecton, Captain components, Knative, Courier Ingress, and yeah, everything, and we'll configure the component to work together. So at the end, after you run the script, you get your kind cluster, and then you have Tecton installed with the cloud events component, which is the experimental component that we have here, and the dashboard and the CLI. The CLI must be installed locally. And then Captain is also installed with 2 extra components, the inbound adapter and the outbound adapter. Then there is a Knative eventing broker resource created, which is an object that is able basically to receive. It acts as a sink or cloud events. So you can send cloud events to it, and then you can define triggers, which are CRDs again, and the triggers, you define filter rules. And every time the filter rule is matched, it's basically Knative eventing takes care of getting events from the broker to the sink specified in the trigger. All right, so and we have then Tecton Cloud events token to the broker, Captain outbound token to the broker. And then there is also the Cloud Event Player application, which is listening to the broker. Tecton Triggers is listening for certain events from the broker, and Captain Inbound is listening for certain events from the broker. And let's see, maybe I can show you the shipyard file. So on Captain side, the setup is relatively simple. There is a sequence, what Captain calls a sequence, which is a delivery sequence, which has only 2 steps or tasks. The first is approval, it's a manual approval. And the second one is the deployment. And the idea is that after an approval, then the deployment is started, but the actual deployment is executed by Tecton. And before the approval happens, Tecton will build a container image, send a message to Captain to trigger the sequence, and then the sequence will happen. So there is a sequence diagram as well to show this. I don't know if it, but yeah, I guess you can see the user runs the build pipeline on Tecton side. Once the pipeline is finished, so we send the CD artifact package message to Captain. So this is actually going through the broker, not directly. And then we have the sequence started via production delivery triggered to Captain. Then we go back to the user waiting for approval. And once approval is achieved, then Captain says it's deployment triggered, which then goes to the broker as a CD artifact published event. This event is picked up both by Tecton triggers as well as by Captain Inbound again. And this is used by Captain Inbound to say a deployment started message. And then it's used by Tecton triggers to start a deploy pipeline, which deploys the service and then sends a deployment finished event, which closes the sequence on Captain's side. Yeah, any questions so far? Yeah.
Always. So.
Okay, so to start the demo, you run tkn command, which runs a pipeline. Just accept all the default values for the parameters. And then you see in the Tecton dashboard, pipeline, the build pipeline started, which clones a repo, builds a Docker image, and exports some results. The cloud event player, oops, there's nothing. I didn't break before. Right, so the pipeline finished. And if I refresh Captain, nothing happens. Okay, looks like I broke my environment right before. Yes.
Does Tecton print in the logs when it's sending an event?
Yes. I was fiddling with the latest version of the Cloud Events controller, so I might have broke something there. Let me just check. Oh, there is no sync configured. Okay, I see. So when I redeployed, the event controller, I didn't reconfigure. Okay. Start again. Just clean up, recreate, oops. No, from here, yeah, from here. Recreate the Captain project. With pipelines. And we start. Yeah, okay, so this time we see events in the cloud player. So Tecton sends pipeline queued, pipeline started. Pipeline is running. On Captain side, still nothing. This is been the container image and pushing it to my local registry, which normally runs quite fast, but maybe my laptop is not so happy right now. Right, okay, the pipeline finished. So if you look on Captain side, you can see that there is a delivery, which is waiting for approval. So it's the production environment. So we go to the delivery and expand it. You can see here, this is the SHA of the container image that was created by the Tecton pipeline. And if we do the approval, then Captain will start the next task, which is the deployment. And you see deployment is handled by Tecton. And if you go back to Tecton and look at the pipeline runs, there will be a new pipeline run running, which is the deploy pipeline. And once the deployment pipeline is finished, we'll send an message back. And you can see all the events popping up here. So Tecton sent the pipeline run queued and started and finished, but it also sent the artifact packaged. Then Captain sent the artifact published. And once Tecton finished the deployment, it sends also the service deployed message there. So once the service deployed, message is sent, Captain closes the sequence. And you can see in the deployment here, if you click on the link, it takes you to the app which has been deployed, which is just an nginx with a static page. And yeah, that's about it. Maybe you can show you in the Tecton pipeline. Where is it? Yeah. In the results, using Tecton results to transport some of the information. So this is the environment ID, which is the URL where the demo is deployed. The service name matches the service name on Captain side. The service version is the deployment version, and then the Captain context and Captain trigger ID are there.
I think this is pretty amazing already. So
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, I think
A question. Go ahead, please.
And as I mentioned, I think on another thread which we had, I think it's great that we have this working right now, because right now it feels a bit like an overhead, maybe driving it this way, but now it could do funny things like adding an additional sequence in Captain or deploying to a totally different environment. And then we could see how it like gets picked up for quality gate validation. So I can talk to the Captain team that we add something in there, because the example right now has most of those components in there. I think for the proof of concept, it shows that it works actually really nicely.
Good. Yeah, so I had a chat yesterday with Johannes and Jürgen.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, they also mentioned like adding multi-stage or quality gates. I think eventually it would be good, really good to have quality gates, because in my understanding, those are like validation of a deployment. So if you don't pass a quality gate, you could have like a incident type of event from our protocol, which is the kind of information that you need if you want to have like the whole DevOps metrics or dollar metrics type of information.
In this case, we would create a deployment finished with failed event.
Okay.
We don't create an incident. We only really create incidents if something is in production or running in an environment and something unexpected happens. So deployment failing is nothing we consider unexpected. We consider just something that might happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem notification we distinguish. If you do a deployment, it might just not work. That's not ideal, but kind of like expected to happen from now and then. And we only create the problem when something happens that's like literally unexpected and most likely not related to deployment as well. Like think of like an availability zone failing, or suddenly your response time spiking for no specific reason.
Okay. But the quality gate applies then after the deployment is complete or before?
So after the deployment is complete, you would then obviously trigger like a performance test, which we could simply, in this case, use with Hey. We could use the Captain Hey service even to run it. Yeah. Which would be funny, because then we would even have a task that's neither Tecton nor Captain, or at least even the Captain execution plane. Then we would, after that, the test is run, we would look at the results via the quality gate, and based on the quality gate, we would then decide what we want to do. So roll back the deployment or promote it to the next stage, depending on whatever we want it to be.
Right. But if that's production, would you have a quality gate in the production environment as well? Or how do you?
We do, because we use it for, we use the same as SLO definitions we use for pre-production and production.
Right.
The quality gates are always based on SLOs, maybe to clarify. We use them, for example, for validation of remediation actions. So if you have a problem in production, we have a remediation action which we're triggering. We then validate whether we actually change the metrics again.
Yeah.
because otherwise you would just mess around with the environment and would not validate whether it actually helped.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. The other area where I would like to continue developing in future, which I think is important, is this bottom layer here, because I want to show the advantage of the fact that everything is going through the same protocol and also the broker. But the fact that everyone speaks through the same protocol here, it means that then here you can have someone that listens to all the events and they're all in the same consistent format. And then right now I only have this cloud event player that shows you a list of events, but you could build something where you have a timeline, for instance, where you show all the events specific to a certain workflow, and then you can see them all consistently in one place. Or you could have all these events stored in some kind of database, and then use something like 4 keys, to measure how you're doing over time in your deployments. And so I think see how using a common protocol makes it easier not only for different applications to talk to each other, but also to build an ecosystem of applications that can benefit from having a shared semantics in the events. So that allows you to, understand events that are coming from different platforms and build logic on top of that. That's an area that I think is also important to grow in the POC.
Yeah, that sounds logical. Do we want to, or is it too early to add another component? So we have 3 components communicating. I don't know if it's a good idea or not, but there were some kind of work on a cloud events plugin for Jenkins, I think. Mm-hmm. So we would like to use that one and connect a 3rd component, or should we focus on the visualization part, the monitoring? Because I agree, I mean, that is, at least it's a visual impact. So if you're showing it, you can show to people that, okay, these 2 components are using the same protocol, and therefore we can use one visualization to view them both.
Yeah, I think it's we can add an extra component, or we can have multiple flavors of the POC where we use Captain and Jenkins, Captain and Tecton, Tecton and Spinnaker. We can build multiple versions, or we can have one where we use 3 or 4, but it becomes, I guess, maybe more complex if you have too many components to show the demo and to run everything on your laptop. But definitely, I think it's worth getting more components on board.
But from the monitoring perspective, I think what would be nice maybe to transform this into, or to use the trigger events and convert them to OTLP, which would give us open telemetry data, and then you could visualize it really as a transaction trace for each individual event sequence that got started. Because then you would have to monitor it. You see, no matter how complex your flows are, you can visualize them. So I would.
Right. Is it OTLP?
Open Telemetry Line Protocol, yeah.
Yeah.
Here, a link here.
So they have a visualization. So just if you convert it to OTLP, there is a visualization already there to use them.
Yeah, you can use just Jaeger. If you push it into Jaeger, you could visualize it.
Yeah, because that would be great, because the Knative components support tracing already, so I tried enabling it and connected to Zipkin, but they show tracing only within every single event. So they show tracing information about the story of a single event, but not across the events, which is the most interesting part. So yeah, definitely having something like OTLP that allows us to see across all the events would be best. Is that something? Do you have experience with that, Alois? Is that something?
I have people on the team who work with this already that I can connect you with.
Okay, yeah, that would be great.
Andrea, you mentioned Spinnaker. Do we have any context? Do we have any idea how hard it is to integrate Spinnaker in this?
In the beginning, I heard that Spinnaker was started working on their cloud events or eventing story. But yeah, I need to reach out to some Spinnaker folks to see if they're interested in working on this. I think it would be great because it's another one of the CDF project as well. So I think if you have Jenkins, we have Tekton, we have also Spinnaker. I mean, I think it's great that we have Captain, which is not in the CDF, but it's also great to see that this protocol is not meant to be for CDF projects only. So this is a very good story as well, I think. But yeah. Let me take an action for me to follow up on this. I cannot write sentences today. Okay, great. I think that was really useful feedback. So we have some good ideas on how to further develop this. So for the we have a talk at DevOps World with Mauricio and myself. The conference is happening in September, but the recording is going to happen next week. So I think the version that I've shown you today is pretty much what we're going to use for the conference, because I don't think there is much time to add much more. Unless, I mean, if we are able to build something quickly with OTLP and Jaeger, that would be great.
Yeah, I think that's right now very unlikely because we also have some conference submissions that they moved forward.
Right. Okay. Then, yeah, then I think this version is what we're going to show for the conference. And yeah, but I think it's it should be enough for this first POC, and then we can continue building on this. And we discussed yesterday with Johannes and Jürgen that Mauricio in August, I think, he will present this to one of the Captain user groups as well. And I plan to do a presentation to the Tecton community as well, so we can keep iterating on these and making more and more people aware that we're working on this, and hopefully get more people joining our meeting as well and contributing.
And I'll also talk to the team, because I think we can show how we dynamically reconfigure like delivery sequences and workflows on the fly in Captain, while we keep the rest the way it is. So, but it's a really great. I really enjoyed that. Really great demo. And thanks for taking the initiative to drive this forward.
Sure.
Just one question I remembered. In Tecton, is like Tecton sending, I don't know if you say natively, the event protocol, or is there translation in Tecton?
Yeah, so Tecton send cloud events natively from the core controller, but we started an experimental project within Tecton, which is a dedicated controller that sends the CDF type of events natively. So it basically watches the Tecton CRDs and then sends the events. Normally it would send like core events, pipeline start, pipeline end, and this kind of things. Yeah, so like CD pipeline run started and CD pipeline run finished. But the way that we have made it is so that you can specify spatial annotations on your Tecton resources like this. So if you say this is the build artifact pipeline, and if it has the CD artifact package enabled annotation, then it will send that event if the pipeline is finished successfully. And same for the service deployed events.
Yeah, nice. And then from Captain side, then you're actually doing translations, right? From Captain events to the CD events.
Yes. Yeah. So we have two components that they're doing translation inbound and where is it? Here, inbound and outbound. It's slightly more than just a translation, because if you see, so there is some logic in there as well. So when Captain receives, what is it? The delivery triggered after the approval, then it will send, sorry, when it receives the artifact packaged, it will send a delivery triggered. And when it receives, then the outbound, it receives a deployment trigger, it will send an artifact published. And you can see it's not like a one-to-one mapping between these events. It's a mapping that makes sense for this POC, at least. Yeah, so we need to do some work in here to kind of make sure that the events that we have on the CD side align somehow with the Captain events, and also with events from other platforms that are interested in enjoying this. But I think this is, yeah, that's why it's good to work on this POC, because then we can see this kind of problem. In the sequence diagram, I also try to map a little bit how the different bits of information are passed across the events. And right now, things like the trigger ID and the context from Captain, they're just somewhere in the payload of the event, but in a location that is not defined anyhow by our protocol. But there we could think of having some extension mechanism so that you can have those fields in a more known location instead of having like custom code like today.
Yeah. The idea is to also standardize more in those. So we had them in for like quite a while in Captain. They're kind of inspired already, but not yet fully have the W3C trace context in there. But the idea is to have like the trace parent more or less with the trace ID and the parent ID in there, which is not distributed tracing. We had just the Captain events before that, but there have been plans for a while to convert this to the W3C trace context anyways, and this could make it then into the cloud events main part even.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. There is an extension for that in the cloud events, I think. So, yeah.
They're conceptually doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
It just existed before the other one existed. That's why and we have, honestly, we didn't have yet time to consolidate this, but it should be done.
Cool. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to do is to go and present this to the cloud events community. And I already spoke to one of the folks there. It's from IBM, so it's easy for me to get in touch. But yeah, so maybe schedule a presentation maybe after the summer, so we can get some feedback from them as well. And yeah. All right.
Nice. Good work.
All right. Anything else? We are about at the top of the hour, so not much time left. Anything else? Any other question?
I think it's a great start. I have to look at the project. I can think of a number of very funny demos that you can then do GitHub style on the delivery approaches and bringing the two together.
Yeah, that would be great.
The idea is you can say, well, you can keep your pipeline delivery right now, but if you want to add like an additional stage, you don't have to touch any of your core pipeline code. You can add chaos engineering on top of it without having to touch your pipeline. So I'll talk to Jürgen and Johannes, but this looks very interesting. It's also good that it runs on kind, so everybody can test it locally, which I think is super important as well.
Yeah. Yeah, if you try the script, let me know. I mean, it's a bit hacked together, but over time we can make it nicer and nicer. Maybe put flags in there, what we want to deploy or configure. We could even use Ansible or something more structured than Bash. But for now, at least it runs and installs stuff. So yeah,
it's a good start.
Cool. All right. Thanks for the great conversation today. Good to see you all. And yeah, until next time then.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yeah. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.